Generations of family peace. The paperwork, the practical, and the people. Welcome to I Love Them Enough. I'm attorney Scott Conway, also known affectionately as Grandmaster Scott because of my martial arts background. I'm also a pastor. And this combination of perspectives lets me have a unique look at this because I see it from the legal standpoint, the paperwork, the part that the lawyers do, drafting your appropriate documents. I see it from the practical things of all the things that have to be done so that you can follow up and do all of the things later. And from the people standpoint, because I've worked with people through their grief, during their funerals, during their struggles, and then considered as a lawyer that to be in this emotional state and have to handle all of that kind of changes your perspective on that. And as a martial artist trained in conflict, and part of that of creating and preserving peace is seeing how sometimes we set up our own conflict. And that in the estate plan, sometimes we leave behind a fight that's all set up, ready to almost force people to fight with each other. Now, what are the three biggest problems that we see? Well, the big ones I see is no document, old documents, and wrong documents. The no documents, that one's easy. Everyone knows if you have that problem. If you have a no document problem because you know you've never done an estate plan, you have no will, you have no trust, you have no nothing. You know you have a situation. The old, at least with old, you also know you have a problem. Maybe you have an estate that doesn't include your grandchildren or doesn't include all of your children because you got it done when you had 2 kids and now you have 3 kids, or you put it together when your kids were small and now they're adults, or other major life changes have occurred. The one that bothers me the most, this last one, the wrong documents. When the documents are incorrect, the documents don't do what you think they're going to do. And of course, the solution to no documents is to have some documents. The solution to old documents is to have new documents. And the solution to wrong documents is, of course, to have it all set up right. And that's what we want to look at doing and getting you set up right. So taking a look at what are these documents? What are the fundamental 5 documents? The fundamental 5 is a will, a trust, and then you have your powers of attorney. There's a financial and a medical power of attorney. And some places in some jurisdictions, these might be able to be one document, but the powers of attorney in a lot of the jurisdictions that I've worked in have different requirements. For instance, in the state of California, the financial power of attorney, that one needs a notary. The medical power of attorney needs 2 witnesses. Well, what happens if you don't have your 2 witnesses? Well, then you don't have a valid medical power of attorney. And you have these kind of things. And then you have a directive. Now, I think the medical directive is a stupidly named document because the official name is a living will. Okay, well, if you have a will and a living will, those are 2 completely different things. But if you have a trust and a living trust, well, a living trust is basically what we call an inter vivos trust. It's a normal trust. So when someone says, I have a trust or I have a living trust, they're probably talking about exactly the same thing. When they say they have a will and a living will, those are completely different things. That annoys me. Just as a lawyer, what happens when things are stupidly named? Well, when things are stupidly named, you end up with a lot of confused people. But now let's review some of these situations with the 3 major problems. So I call this 3 and 5. The top 3 problems and the top 5 documents. So on the will, if you have no will, then things are just going to happen by what we call intestate succession. And that essentially means the government's going to decide. And there's laws and rules and things happen the way things happen, regardless of how you want things to happen. But another problem is an old will. If things have substantially changed and you have an old document that is still in effect, if, say, for instance, you have one from when you were single and now you're married, or one from when you were married and now you're divorced, some of these things would benefit from being updated. So often an old will isn't just a problem because it's old. It's a problem because it is now wrong. My biggest hang up here is when it's the wrong will, when something's not doing what you want it to do. It's not doing what you expected it to do. You look at it, it looks like it's probably good, but it might not cover things quite the way you want to cover things. It might not produce the long-term effect after you're gone that you really hoped it was going to do. Then you have a trust. Well, if you have no trust, to be honest, you may not need a trust. If your estate is worth, we'll say less than $100,000. Often if you have an estate that's in the 5 figures or even less than that, you may not need a trust. A will might be perfectly fine. You might even do different ways of transferring your assets that don't work with the trust and you just hand it off. But if you are worth over $100,000, if you have any complexity, if you want to just keep your things out of probate, you might want to have a trust. Well, one of the issues you can run into is an old trust. A trust that might have been perfect for when it was drafted, but that was so long ago and so many things have changed that it probably could stand to be updated because things are different now. In fact, the document could still do exactly what you want it to do. But the problem you run into is that this is a box. And what if the trust doesn't own what you wanted it to own? What if it doesn't hold title the way you thought it was going to hold title? What if you thought that it was going to take care of some things that are outside the scope of what it's able to do? So these are things that you need to take a look at and you need to consider. Also, when you have a trustee that doesn't know what's coming, sometimes it's a simple thing of, well, yeah, that all looks good, but the named trustee isn't someone who's in a position to be able to handle that. So say, for instance, right now, I live in the exact same state that my mother lives in. So if she named me as trustee to her trust, no problem. But what if I move away? What if I don't even live in the country anymore and I'm the next designated trustee? That's going to be a bit more difficult for me to be able to take care of that for her, because not only would I not live in the same state, if I don't even live in the same country. Now, how about the financial power of attorney? What if I don't have one? Well, honestly, that can be fine. But a lot of people are in a position where you really don't need one. But if you need one, you better already have it in place. What if you have an old power of attorney? Now, these are scary because a power of attorney can give someone the authority to do all sorts of things, including empty your bank accounts, including sell your house. And if there's an old one floating around out there that doesn't have an expiration, that can be a problem. And then, of course, having the wrong financial power of attorney. Same issue we've been talking about, where it's set up to do certain things, but it's not set up to do things in all the necessary ways for the things you want done to actually be able to be done. Now, similar in a medical power of attorney, a lot of us, honestly, we don't need a medical power of attorney. The law will already say that our immediate family gets to decide. If we're married, our spouse gets to decide. Maybe our parents decide, our children decide, our siblings decide. So we might not need a medical power of attorney, but if we don't have those people handy to be consulted, well, we may want one. Also, is a question if it's an old medical power of attorney, especially if our philosophies have changed or the philosophies of the people who we might have delegated that to have changed. And then, of course, we have the issue of the wrong medical power of attorney, where we think we're all set, but we actually aren't. And then the medical directive, which, as I mentioned, is a stupidly named document because it is commonly called a living will. I like to call it a directive because it's clear what we're talking about. It's a medical directive. Now, do you need one? You may not need one. You may not have any cause for them. But if you have any specific limitations on the treatment you want, if you have any specific desires of treatments you do want, or some hierarchy of things you want considered first, second, third, you need to have a directive. And the challenge with an old directive, again, is what if things have changed? What if your philosophy have changed? What if at one time you were thinking, well, I don't want to be plugged into any machines, but now you're looking at current medical advances and going, well, actually, the way things are now, I wouldn't mind being hooked up to a machine for a period of time while we tried different things. That might be okay with me now. Or if, I had one medical or philosophical belief and now that's changed, I may want my directives updated. And then, of course, we have the issue of the wrong directive, where you have all the pieces in place, you think, but maybe you don't. And there's issues surrounding these things that need to be addressed. So you want these to be current, you want these to be right. You want a current will. You want a will that aligns with the reality as it exists now. You want to have a trust that is current, that it deals with reality as it is now, and it does what you want it to do and doesn't accidentally do things you don't want done. A financial and a medical power of attorney properly enforced with all of the collateral steps beyond just having the paperwork done that ought to be in place so that it'll be effective. And then finally, if you have opinions about your own medical care, to have a directive prepared that covers some of the basics. Now, who am I to be talking about all of these things? I mean, obviously, I'm an attorney. I'm an estate attorney who's done a lot of work in this for decades. It was 1992 that I got involved in my first estate case. And because of a missing document, a well-crafted will, a well-crafted trust, a missing document cost Mary's children $350,000. And again, we keep seeing things where we think we're okay, and turns out we're not. Or even all of this stuff looks okay, but a problem got created for somebody we left behind that we didn't realize we were making. And I've had my fair share of work with people who were handling stuff, and they had no idea the mess they were landing in, no idea the problems with the IRS that was waiting for them, no idea the conflict that was going to occur with the peers that was all set up for them, completely by accident, but all set up for them. Not only am I a lawyer, I'm also a pastor. So I've sat with people through grief. I've counseled people through the loss of loved ones. I've done funerals. I have direct exposure to how people feel in that emotional turmoil. And to be in the middle of that kind of grief and have to troubleshoot these problems, that is a terrible place to leave people in. That intentionally or not, to have these problems dropped on someone who is already grieving. I would like the only problem someone has that they have to deal with that will have any level of difficulty whatsoever to just be the grief, not the grief and especially not the grief and things that will have lasting legal consequences for them. And then also, I'm a martial arts grandmaster, often affectionately known as Grandmaster Scott. Sounds like a big deal. Honestly, all you have to do is train and never quit. And after some period of time, you can become a grandmaster. I've been doing this for over 50 years myself. But part of that is a lifetime of training in conflict, in fighting, and how often we try to create peace, preserve peace. But then we see over here in the way we set up the estate that we're setting up the fight. We're creating the environment for conflict when we don't have to, when there's easy solutions. So I'm hopeful that in this entire process that you will get your documents current, you will get your documents right. The I Love Them Enough Master Estate Training will help you do that. And so I hope if you do not have current documents that you are sure are right with all of the practical and the people stuff in place along with the paperwork, that you will dive into the I Love Them Enough Master Estate Training, and we will take good care of your family, good care of the paperwork and the practical and the people for generations of family peace.